And so we shouldn't feel ashamed about it. We should be able to talk about it and normalize failure, because it's just part of life. It's part of our career, even in our personal life. If you create that openness, it really changes the atmosphere, the way that you can talk about it, think about it. It's obviously really hard. Yeah. It was devastating, like I said. But looking back on it, I also see now it set me on the right path.
Hey everyone, it's Samantha, and welcome back to another episode of Paths. Paths is a program of LGBT tech that is focused on visibility and inclusion of LGBTQ+ folks in STEAM. Paths podcast allows us to talk to professionals across the LGBTQ+ community in various STEAM fields and get to hear their stories, from their background to how they got to where they are, to their advice for others on how to get into their fields and industries. Everyone's paths vary, are unique, and are incredibly insightful. Before we jump into this month's episode, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to show your support and never miss another episode. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in a Paths interview today. Could we just get started by introducing yourself to our audience, and could you include your name and your pronouns, and also maybe a few words of how your friends would describe you?
Sure. So my name is Raj Korpan. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm really excited to be here. I would say my friends would say I'm a very kind, compassionate person. I am a good listener, and I am also a big nerd.
Excellent. And could you tell us a little bit about how you identify within the LGBTQ+ community, and please feel free to recognize any other parts of your identity that are important for you to recognize?
Sure. I would say I identify as a gay cisgender man. I also call myself queer. The other parts of my identity I really associate with is being South Asian, being brown, particularly Indian, being a child of immigrants as well. So my parents moved here when they were pretty young, but still they didn't grow up in this country. They moved here. I would say another big part of my identity now is being a parent, being a dad. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and so she takes up a lot of my time, and being a father is a full-time job as well, a full-time part of my identity.
Absolutely, and one of the most important jobs.
Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit about what you do professionally? So maybe share your profession, and then could you also explain your profession to somebody who's maybe never heard of it before?
Absolutely. I'm an assistant professor of computer science. So I teach at Hunter College at the City University of New York. And being a professor is really like you have a million different hats. So you're doing so many different things all the time. Between teaching different courses, I teach courses from introductory programming courses all the way up to senior capstone courses, robotics and AI, which is my specific area. And everything in between, from tech ethics to learning how to create websites. So it's a lot of different topics. I also do research. I run a lab called the Trustworthy, Intelligent, and Explainable Robotics Lab, where I have students working with me on different research projects. We're doing all kinds of research in the realm of AI and robotics. And then mentoring students is a huge part of my job. And one of the things I love the most is getting to work with them to help them realize their dreams, help them figuring out what they want to do with their career, what direction they want to go in, what is the job they want to do. Do they want to go to grad school or pursue becoming a software developer or something else? Yeah. And on top of that, there's things like being on committees and doing administrative work and so on and so on and so on. It's a never-ending pile of things to work on.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What do you feel like, based on your experience, is the most important thing about the mentorship work that you do? Like, why is mentorship so important?
I think for me, it's both from a place of like not having a lot of strong mentors myself and wanting to change that for my students, but also seeing like my students are really diverse. CUNY, or City University of New York, is like the public university of New York City. We serve everyone. And we have a lot of people who are coming from low-income backgrounds or the first in their family to go to college. And so a lot of these students don't have the same background or experience in order to know what direction they want to go in. There's something we call the hidden curriculum, which is like all the things that you don't know about that you're supposed to do in college. Yeah. right? That if you maybe have a parent who went through that, they can guide you. They can tell you, oh, you should go talk to this person. You should go to office hours. You should ask your professor if they have research opportunities, right? If you don't have anyone in your family that's done that, you're at a huge disadvantage. And so I want to change that. I really want to be that person for my students to help guide them, to give them that feedback, but particularly for students who are so underrepresented in computer science. And we know in tech generally, right, there's so few people from underrepresented groups, or marginalized groups, I should say, women, LGBTQ plus people, and I want to change that. And why does it happen? Well, it's because people don't feel welcome. They don't feel like they have a person there that can champion them, that can help guide them through that.
I love that concept of like the hidden curriculum, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's really important to expose students to, because I think that also applies to the professional world in a lot of ways of just like, you know, like professional conduct and these kinds of things that are a lot of it's just like socialization and who has access to those things. And it's not necessarily things that you learn in school.
No.
Could you talk about like where did you grow up? Where do you live now? And what does your community look like growing up? And what does your community look like now?
Very different. I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I lived there the first few years of my life. My grandparents, when they moved here, that's where they ended up. And so I spent a few years there, but I spent most of my childhood growing up on Long Island. So here in New York, outside of New York City, on Long Island, way far out on the east end of Long Island in a very rural, small town of 3,000 people. So it was a very different experience than living in New York City. It was not something that I loved. I would not go back to that environment quickly. The town I lived in was like 98% white. So I was one of the very few people who were non-white that was Asian. In school growing up, it was like me and my brother and like one or two other non-white people in our classes. And so it felt very much like this kind of dichotomy, right? Between being at home and around my family, we were constantly surrounded by Indian culture, watching Bollywood movies, listening to music, seeing my family, going to like events and things like that. And then going to school and it's being like completely different and trying to like be as white as possible, essentially, right? You're just a kid, you don't know any better, you just want to fit in. And now I live in New York City. I live in Queens, which is like the most diverse place in the world. And I love it. That's like my favorite part about living here, is being around so many different types of people with all different backgrounds, and seeing how everyone is welcome and accepted for who they are, and they can talk in their own language, they can be around their own people, but also be around all the rest of us too. And we're in this kind of really amazing mixture of people. And I love that about Queens. I love that about New York City. I love that I see my daughters, like she's in daycare, and her class is just filled with all different types of kids, and she's around all these different cultures, and that makes me so happy too.
Yeah.
So different than my experience growing up.
Yeah, but you were able to be intentional about that because you
Yeah.
reflected on it. I don't know what it is, but we've never done interviews in North Carolina, but I feel like such a huge percentage of the folks that we interview have been from North Carolina.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I don't know what
I don't know.
that is, but maybe it's secretly a very queer.
I don't know nowadays, maybe not.
Yeah.
In addition to like being one of the only like brown kids in my class, I was gonna say like growing up, I also like, there was like no queer people at all. So there was like we didn't have any like a GSA club or anything. And so it was like really not exposed to LGBTQ plus people at all growing up. And in my family, there was no one out that was like, was just really also just not accepted within my family and my culture. So that was also very different than my experience now, right? Being in New York City, where it is very accepting.
What initially brought you to New York City?
Okay, so after I graduated from college, I moved to Chicago for a couple of years to work there. I was at this point where I was kind of like, I was working at JP Morgan. I'd been there for 2 years and in this kind of 2-year analyst program. And now I had to kind of find a new permanent position, and the position opened up in New York City, and my parents wanted me to be closer to home. And so I ended up moving back to New York. And that's what brought me back to New York City. It was really just kind of the combination of like, my parents wanted to be closer and this job was open, so I ended up back here.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned growing up that there was not really any other queer kids. Do you remember kind of what your first exposure to queer spaces looked like and when that was?
I think I was just, it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with being gay, and especially like just being in an environment where there was no one else openly gay. There was really a lot of negativity around that in my family, about my parents, and this like expectations to follow this very traditional heteronormative path. So I even in college, I was very much in the closet and denial. And so, yeah, there might have been queer spaces, but I was not going there. Mm-hmm. It was after I graduated, I was living in Chicago, and the group of people I was around, my friends, I was far away from home and my family, and I finally had the chance to kind of like open up, maybe be more of myself and come to terms with my identity. And so that's when I finally like came out to my friends. And then moving back to New York City, I was finally like, okay, I'm gonna really embrace this part of myself and try to go to more queer spaces. So that was kind of when I first kind of got exposed to some queer spaces. I would go to like different meetup groups where they would be having like events and meetups and meet people. And that's how I met my husband at a board game meetup. It wasn't until I would say I was in grad school when I was really in like queer spaces, very intentional queer spaces around some of my like other students at my school, coming together and being in solidarity and community.
Yeah. Did you meet your husband here in New York?
I did.
Okay,
yes.
Cool.
Yeah, I did.
Is he from here?
He's from New York.
Okay.
He born and raised and spent almost his whole life in New York City, except his brief period when he was at Rutgers for college, and then he came right back to New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. Queens specifically, most of his life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember, did you have any role models growing up, whether that's in the community or outside of the community in other parts of your life?
I was thinking about that. No, not really. I mean, I didn't really have a lot of role models growing up. Certainly no like public figure that springs to mind, like I really looked up to this person. Yeah. I would say in my family, I would call my grandfather a role model. He was someone I really looked up to. I was very close to. He's the one who really brought my mom's family to the US. And he was a doctor, and he came from very humble beginnings, living in a very small village in India where there was almost no resources. He was like the youngest of, I want to say 8, and his parents died when he was very young, and so he was pretty much an orphan, and he was raised by some of his older siblings. And from that, he went to medical school in England. He became a doctor. He moved his family to the US. Like, he really accomplished a lot and encouraged me and my cousins, my brother, to really like work hard, have a good work ethic, to value education, to see education as a way to really success and empowerment. And so he was a big role model, I would say, for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a really strong and important role model. And I think, you mentioned earlier with the mentorship and everything that you do through your work, and like kind of the understanding that you have of, I'm sure that's influential, but then also, looking for other role models and maybe not seeing them. And so like really understanding the importance of having role models and mentors. And,
absolutely.
Yeah. Shifting a little bit more into kind of your path into STEAM, do you remember what kind of first sparked your interest in your fields? I feel like you're spanning kind of a lot of different fields. So could you talk us through a little bit of what your journey looked like where you recognized your interests and like, this is what I want to do? And
Yeah, I would say it was a very winding path to get to where I am. I certainly did not imagine this being my career when I was a kid. I didn't think I would become a professor or go into research or anything like that. But I will say I was exposed to research pretty early on. When I was in high school, I took like a science research class. I got to work on a research project that had to do with hydroponics and growing plants and things like that. And I did some experiments. And it was really interesting. I really enjoyed, I've always liked science since I was a kid. And that was kind of my first exposure to what research could be, but it was not like a path forward for me. What was really the path was what the path set by my parents. My parents were like, you're going to become an investment banker and this is what you're going to do. And I was young and I really had no agency, and I just had to kind of follow the path they set out for me. And that's what led me to studying economics and finance in college, going to work at JP Morgan afterwards, and working in this kind of corporate finance environment. And I worked there for 3 years, and at first it was okay, and it was a job, but I really didn't enjoy it, and I was pretty miserable by the end, and I just felt like I had no guidance, no mentorship. I just didn't know what to do. And it ended up being like I wasn't showing up to work on time. I wasn't doing anything when I was there. And eventually I got fired because it was like I was clearly miserable. I wasn't doing anything that I was supposed to be doing, which I didn't even really know what they wanted me to do. And that was like, I would say, a big turning point for me, because it kind of was like this wake-up call. It was devastating, certainly in the moment. I felt like such a failure. Like my parents had pushed me to do this for so long, and now I got fired from a job for the first time, and it was such an awful feeling. But it was also kind of a point at which I could say, what is it that I really want to do with my life? Like, where am I going? I clearly didn't like this place I was at. Led me to kind of evaluate, what are the things I actually do like? What did I like doing in college? What did I like in this job? And I always like working with data. I like doing spreadsheets. I like working with data and like doing data analysis, making charts, those kind of things. And I thought, if that's what I like, why don't I try to make that into a career? Why not try to shift gears, focus on maybe something like data science, where I could really just do this part of the job that I really like. So I applied to a bunch of jobs, didn't get anything, started freelancing. I applied to MBA programs. I didn't get in anywhere. And I was just like kind of aimlessly trying to figure out what I was going to do. I applied to some master's programs, and I got into a master's of statistics at Baruch College at the City University of New York. And that's where I really got a chance to really do research for the first time with a professor. So I got to work with a professor in her research lab. And it finally exposed me to like, what could this be like? And it was amazing. I felt like so excited because it was like these really hard problems. No one has solved them. And it was so open-ended, and you could let your curiosity drive you. You could kind of pursue it, and you had so much agency of how you went about doing this work. It's like, wow, I really like this. Can I make this into a career? Can I actually do this for my job? And so I was like, I'm just gonna apply to PhD programs and see what happens. So I got into a bunch of PhD programs, both in statistics and computer science, and I had to kind of decide which direction to go in. Ultimately, I decided to go to computer science because I wanted to stay in the city. This is where my family was, my friends, and the stats programs I got into were like further away, and I didn't really want to do that. So as I got into computer science program, it was like, I'm a computer science PhD student who's never taken a computer science class before.
Wow.
Didn't know how to program. And I was just like, I felt such like a fish out of water. I had no clue what am I getting myself into. But I had an amazing advisor, and I would say is another big role model for me now. But she really decided like, I'm going to take a chance on you because I believe like you have the right attitude, the right mindset to do research, even if you don't have the right experience or background. So she has done a lot of research in AI for a long time and machine learning. And so she let me really explore. She gave me time to really like explore different sub areas of AI and look at what research is like in these different topics before kind of letting me kind of figure out what I wanted to do, which ended up being robotics. And how do we apply AI systems on robots so that they can be intelligent and competent?
I have so many follow-up questions.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it's like the visibility that you're kind of creating around, doing a PhD program and something that's not really in your background. Like, I think that's really important. Like you said, with the right attitude and the right mindset and everything. Like,
yes.
A lot of folks probably don't know that that's even an option that they could consider. But I also think that the visibility that you're creating around, like, there's so much like stigma and shame around like getting fired, but like really being able to like talk openly about like why that happened and kind of like where you were at. Like, I think that that's just really important for a lot of people to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I tell my students, one, that it is okay to fail. Mm-hmm. It's okay to get fired, to fail at something. Everyone goes through it. Mm-hmm. And so we shouldn't feel ashamed about it. We should be able to talk about it and normalize failure, because it's just part of life. It's part of our career, even in our personal life. And if you create that openness, it really changes the atmosphere, the way that you can talk about it, think about it. It's obviously really hard. Yeah. It was devastating, like I said. But looking back on it, I also see now it set me on the right path. Mm-hmm. So even though it was so hard in the moment, sometimes those failures or getting fired can make such a difference in helping you to the right direction. I also tell my students, like, you don't have to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life now when you're 18 years old, right?
Yeah.
You have the rest of your life and you can change, right? You can change your mind, you can take different directions. I certainly was all over the place, and it took me a long time to finally get to where I am now, where I'm in a place where I love what I do. Yes, it's hard, but I love it. And I'm glad that I got here eventually. And for some people, it's going to be like that too, right? A big winding path, and you try 5 different things where you really find that one thing for you. For others, maybe they find it on the first shot and they're lucky and they do that. That's great as well.
Yeah. And I think that it's, that kind of mindset that you're setting folks up for and being able to talk about those things, like it's helpful in the moments when those things happen, because they do happen, but also just like in the mindset when you're like getting into the job market and stuff, that like it's okay to fail, and like I think that completely changes your relationship with work and everything. So it's important to hear those things.
It's almost like it shouldn't be a reflection on you.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't feel like you are a failure, right? It's you have to become more resilient and realize like failures happen, and it's not always a reflection like on a personal failing or something like that.
Yeah. Another thing that you mentioned is, you were working with a professor who had been working in AI for a long time. And I think that a lot of the times, especially the conversations around AI right now, at least kind of in the general public, it's like this new thing that's, it's kind of a buzzword, kind of like this new technology that's like changing all these things, but like AI has been around for a long time. So could you maybe talk about that a little bit? Like maybe you could provide us with a little bit more context around AI and the ways that it's not actually that new. Maybe there are new things coming out all the time, but maybe could you just provide a little context around AI?
Absolutely. So AI has actually been around for a long time, and it's gone through multiple cycles. We would say like the father of AI, at least I would consider, is Alan Turing, who worked on kind of the initial ideas of what AI could be way back in the 40s, 1940s. And Alan Turing is like a personal really inspiration and hero for me, between being kind of this huge figure and really thinking about like, can machines even be intelligent, and what would that mean and how would that look like, to also being someone who was gay and persecuted for being gay, and ultimately was committed suicide because of the persecution that he was targeted with. And it's this tragic dichotomy of someone who, like, what if he had been alive for longer? What are the contributions he could have made to see actual computers come to life and watch as they developed, and what he could have contributed to that. So it's a sad story, but also kind of inspirational that, like, despite the discrimination he faced, he still had these amazing ideas that really founded the field. I mean, people talk about the Turing test, or there's the Turing Award, which is essentially the Nobel Prize in computer science, right, named after Alan Turing. So that was started many decades ago. And in the 50s is when really the founding of AI as an academic enterprise started. There was an initial conference on artificial intelligence back then. And so a lot of the topics that you're seeing now have been around for 50 plus years, 60, 70 years. And we've seen these cycles where AI gets really hyped and people think it's going to solve all the problems. And then there are these things called AI winters, right? Where the hype dies down and people realize it's not doing exactly what we want it to do. And so I would say around the turn of the century, around late 1990s, early 2000s, we started to see actual applications of AI in everyday life. Not what you see right now, which is large language models, but all sorts of other things, right? How we use AI in Google, for example, when you search for something, it's using AI to figure out what are the results that are shown on your screen. Or if you think about applying to a job, right? And your resume is read by a program, that program is actually AI, right? It's not what we narrowly define AI maybe now. People think of AI, they only think of ChatGPT, right? AI is a much more broad field, from things like facial recognition to controlling robots, to processing documents, to all sorts of different applications. They all kind of fall under this larger bucket of AI. What I would say now, what has happened is, because we have so much more data, right? All the data on the internet from everything you can imagine, We have much more powerful processing, right, on these huge supercomputers that can process tremendous amounts of data. The combination of those two things has allowed really these things called neural networks to become much more powerful and allowed us to now have these advancements we've seen in the last few years, right? Doing things like translation, all the translation that happens nowadays is using AI and machine learning, doing things like labeling images, right? For different, what objects are in this picture. Is it a dog or a cat, right? We've become really, really good at those kinds of things. And so we've seen this kind of evolution over time, and it goes through waves. I think right now we're at the peak of the hype cycle for these large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini and so on. And it remains to be seen what will actually come of it. I think there has been really amazing advancements in the use of these tools. I'm also kind of skeptical about what will they actually be useful for. The other thing I would say is there's also been cycles in this kind of discipline about focusing on creating this artificial general intelligence, right? The singularity moment where we have something that's sentient and conscious and more intelligent and more superhuman than regular human beings. And there's been cycles where we're more focused on how do we get this thing to just label a picture, right? Or to figure out how to put together this IKEA furniture, right? What are the steps it needs to do? And so we think about that as narrow focused AI that's really solving a single task versus general purpose AI. And I think right now people are kind of hyped on, can we create this general purpose, intelligent, AGI kind of thing? But what I would say is it's probably unlikely, at least that we're going to experience that anytime soon. That's my opinion. Certainly you'll find plenty of other people who have the opposite in the field. I mean, we've seen it in the news. But I don't think we're going to be anytime soon reaching some kind of superhuman level. Because even if you interact with any of these models now, you ask it simple math questions, it can't do it. Right? So it fails on very simple things, but it succeeds on other very sophisticated things. And so I wouldn't call that some general AI intelligence. The other thing I would add is I don't think that sentience or consciousness needs to be part of the solution. And it doesn't need to be a prerequisite to say that this is superhuman intelligence. Because what does that even mean? And how do we assess that it has that? And how do we define it, right? Those are all unclear, and philosophers have been debating it for centuries, right? And so I don't think we're going to have an answer for that either.
Yeah, I always wonder how much of that is influenced by sci-fi and pop culture and this kind of it's kind of a fantasy, right? But it's like you said, it maybe is not the right question that we need to be asking necessarily. It's interesting, but
it's kind of like the people in the kind of AI safety community, the people who think about how do we build these things in a safe way. There's kind of two camps. One is worried about the broad scale potential of what if there's a singularity, how is it going to disrupt our entire society and so on, and how do we protect for that? And others are thinking about okay, we're not going to be there anytime soon, but it's harming us now, and how do we deal with those specific things that are happening now? Yeah, that thing might happen in the future at some point, but we got to deal with what's going on now. And I would say I'm more in that camp, and I'm not worried about those existential possibilities.
Yeah, I do want to come right back to your last question or your last comment in a second, but could you define just briefly for maybe folks what is a neural network? Maybe at a 101 level, really basic terms, translate that to what does that mean?
So maybe I can first define what artificial intelligence is, at least from my definition. So artificial intelligence is essentially a computer program that's able to reason, problem solve, and learn. And most often we think about AI systems as machine learning algorithms. So what does that mean? Basically, you have some data, maybe it's a bunch of pictures of dogs and cats, and what you want to do is train this program to recognize a picture of a dog and a picture of a cat. So you give it thousands of examples, and it eventually learns through different mathematical formulas how to recognize when it's given a new picture, whether it's a dog or a cat. And so that's what AI systems can do. You can get more and more sophisticated from there, where it does like much more higher level reasoning, right? If it's trying to decide how to do a sequence of tasks one after another, or how to navigate an autonomous vehicle from one place to another place, right? You can come up with much more sophisticated ways of formulating the problem, but at the very basic level, it's essentially like, how do you teach a computer program to be able to take a bunch of data, learn from that data, and do it on new data that it hasn't seen before. So what's a neural network? A neural network is essentially a way of combining information so that it's able to do this kind of learning, essentially. So a neural network, even though it has the word neural, is kind of like inspired by the biology of our brain, right? Our brain consists of neurons. And in our brain, these neurons essentially are all interconnected. And so what happens is, in one neuron, as electric charge builds up, it eventually fires, right? It reaches some threshold of electric energy, and it fires, and it passes that energy on to the next neuron, right? And so that next neuron then starts to get electric, right, energy, and it builds up and continues to fire. And so these sequences of firing and that interconnected firing in your mind is what basically forms your thought and how you're able to think about things and make decisions and so on. And so people were inspired by this kind of like connectivity, right? These neurons all connected to one another and kind of information passing from one to the next. And that's how they designed a neural network. It's a bunch of these things called neurons, and they're passing information, in this case, usually just numbers, right? It's passing certain numbers from one neuron to the next and combining these with different functions, and eventually going to output some kind of prediction.
And you kind of started to talk about, there are folks who are dedicated to like thinking about the ethical questions around technology, around AI though, as well. And I know that this could be an entire course, an entire degree worth of courses, but like, I think about, like you were talking about the history of AI and its relationship with robotics. So I'm thinking about, for example, in the past, like something like a washing machine and the role that it plays in the world as like a new piece of technology where it like frees up people's time, and then they're able to, for example, folks who had access to a washing machine, maybe that means that they're like the, woman, or I feel like at the time was able to go and like enter the workforce because it's like one less thing that they have to, like domestic work. So like just thinking about like the role that these things play in society. But right now with AI, one of the big questions of course is job security. And like there's like a lot of, I think, very founded anxiety around AI replacing jobs, because I think the market is in a way kind of proactively making that the case. Like the companies are deciding that that's going to be the case, but it also, and folks are losing their job. But in a lot of fields, people are worried about losing their job to AI, or being their whole field being like replaced with AI. So I'm curious, like the benefits of AI technology and like the normalization, like is that, I think about like how is that kind of supporting us and in those ways of like what, a lot of the times we think about machines and robots and things like that and how they can support us, but like making sure that we're taking those ethical considerations to make sure that they're serving us. I'm curious about like, based on the work that you do, like what do you feel like are the biggest ethical questions around AI right now?
No, that's a great question. So I'll kind of answer it in a couple ways, I would say. There's ethics in the sense of when you're actually interacting one-on-one with one of these systems, how is it doing that? And how is it formulating its responses? And are we doing that in a way that is safe, right, for the person interacting? Right, so there's a whole bunch of like possible concerns that can come up in there in terms of like bias, for example, is a major issue in how these large language models actually interact with people. And that's been part of some of my research, is looking at that bias, particularly in the context of robotics. From my research, how would a large language model describe a robot's responsibilities based on different identifiers? And so what we looked at was, if you were explicitly given an identifier, you're saying you're a robot working with a person who has autism, or you're a robot working with a person who is Asian. How does it change its response when it's given those identifiers? And in fact, it gives vastly different responses, unfortunately. Very biased responses as well, really falling into the trap of like hyper stereotypes. There's this potential for reinforcing harmful stereotypes, and it's already happening, and there's no safeguards built in to stop this from happening. What I've seen is there's either this kind of hyper stereotyping, or you have kind of the other extreme, which is like complete erasure, right? Because these models, if you don't include the identifier, default to like the majority perspective, which is by default then going to exclude people who are marginalized, underrepresented, who are statistical minorities. And so either you completely erase and don't exist, or if you do say, hey, I'm this type of person or identify as this, it's going to be so hyper stereotyped that it's losing all nuance about how people's lives are very nuanced and diverse. And it's not going to really give fair responses to you. We also see things like unconscious bias in the sense that there's been recent studies showing the way you interact with these systems is influenced by your own background and identity, right? So you don't even know what you're missing out on, right? And the specific study I'm thinking of, for example, is like based on your education level, the way you actually like prompt these models is different. And so the responses you get are different. And sometimes that means you're not being able to use these to the fullest possible extent, right? Just because of these different disadvantages. You might not even realize what is the right thing to even ask to really get the maximum potential out of it. So that's like on the interactive, like one-on-one level, you're talking to this thing, is talking back to you. What are the kind of harms that can happen? And then there's also the ethics of like, where should it even be used? How should it be used? Is it going to be displacing people's livelihoods, right? And that is also really concerning. I think there is this like potential for it to displace a lot of people's jobs. I see it even in my field of computer science. Like one of the first things that people really focused on is like, how do we come up with these models able to write sophisticated programs? And they are really good at it, right? There's things like Copilot, which will like write code, you tell it what you want to do, it'll write the whole program for you. So it's like, what are we doing in our field when we're trying to teach our students to program very basic things? They can just ask ChatGPT and it gives them the exact program, right? And I know colleagues who are like English professors, history professors facing the exact same thing when it comes to like writing essays and that sort of thing. People who are getting into software development or currently software developers, this is a major concern. Like, are these jobs even going to exist? What I would say on both kind of fronts, both like the individual interaction and at the kind of macro level, even though there's all this like potential harm, I think there's also potential benefits as well, right? We have the opportunity to use these tools and the accessibility to these tools like we've never had before, right? Particularly people who are marginalized, we've always been excluded from using a lot of the systems and tools that are not open to us, I should say. And because this has been opened up to the public in a way that other things have, like other AI systems have not been, there's almost like a democratization effect of it. And people who maybe had disadvantage before can now use these tools and use it for their own personal benefit and gain. And I think that is a huge deal. And then in terms of like job displacement, I think, yes, people will be displaced, but there's also a way that people's jobs will just change and not necessarily go away. It will be like, how do you use this tool as part of your job rather than instead of your job? And we've seen that happen, right? Companies are like, we're going to replace all our workers with AI. And then there's actually like a backlash where they realize like this software cannot actually do those people's jobs. We got to rehire all of them. And so it is really not sophisticated enough to actually do people's entire jobs, right? Maybe if it is something extremely tedious and straightforward, yes, it can do that. And we've seen that historically, right? You look at factories, for example, like car factories where you now have robots building the cars instead of people who used to do it. And that was only possible because when you're building a car, it is the exact same thing over and over and over. And you can program a robot to do that exact same thing over and over. You know exactly what to do every time. It's the same exact thing. There's never any deviation, right? A robot can do that. As soon as you start to make it more complex and you have to use judgment and you have to decide things and understand the complexity, yeah, these things fail. They really struggle. And so you really do need people involved with it.
Yeah. I really think it's interesting your point around like the democratization or the space for that it kind of offers. And also, you know, we talk a lot, like our organization talks a lot about, you know, different marginalized communities and like the impacts of AI, because there are huge ethical questions there as you talked about. But like, I really like that you also kind of highlighted the class dynamic of, you know, if folks have different access to education or just different, you know, even different experiences of like what professionalism means and stuff like that. It means that they interact with the technology different. I think that's an important consideration. But I always think about like with AI, you know, if things go in a way that like provides that democratization and benefits us, it's like it can free up our time. So like, you know, maybe we're able to do 8 hours worth of work in 5 hours because we have this tool that can like help us in certain ways. So like ideally, you know, that might not be the way that things play out in the way that we shape society, but there's definitely opportunity there to, you know, like any advancement in technology ideally like works towards making our lives easier and, you know, freeing up us free time.
We hope.
I don't know.
But at the same time, it's like, what are these tools being used for? To like replace art and like things that give us joy.
Right.
Why are those the things that are being automated?
Exactly.
And not the things that we don't like doing, which is like folding our laundry.
Right. Exactly.
People give me that example, and then I'm like, wait. That's really hard to do. Yeah. Like to program a robot to fold laundry is not actually is a very hard task.
I would pay a lot of money for one of those, honestly.
Yes, me too. But just like the dexterity of holding different pieces of cloth and each clothing might be different material, and like how do you get a robot to do it without actually ripping the shirt in half? There's a lot of those problems that come into it.
Yeah. So I'm curious. You know, you kind of started talking about the impact that AI has on like even just on different communities and everything. Why is it so important to have queer and trans folks in the fields of, I guess, every field related to AI? Like, why is that representation so important?
I think it is extremely important because having diverse perspectives makes a huge difference in what is actually created. And we've seen this historically, both just in the development of like the internet and technology and AI now. When there are people who are not in the room, their perspectives are lost. And often the technology that comes out then is not considerate of that. So the examples I can give is an older one is from Google search, right? We know the tech industry is not diverse. So when Google search was being developed in the early years, there was this phenomenon that occurred, which is when you search for people's names, right, just first names, when you search for people like stereotypically white names, it would show ads, right? The ad system was using AI to decide, like based on the search query, what kind of ad should I show? For white people, it was very innocuous things. You would then put like a stereotypically black person's name, and it would show ads for bail bondsmen and for lawyers and criminal lawyers and that kind of thing. So it was like this explicit bias that was happening. And it was literally just a person's first name, just first names. And why did that happen? I mean, one, right, they should have caught it. They should have realized what was happening and prevented it. And that only happens if you have people on your team that say, hey, did we try this? Did we look at this and consider what might happen? Same thing with like early AI models, like language models, like GPT-1 and 2, before now we have 3, 4, 5 just came out, right? When it was GPT-2, there was a study done looking at professions, right? And essentially what they looked at was, for a given gender, what profession would it suggest for that person? And it was extremely biased, as you can imagine. It was more biased than reality, I should say, in the sense that we know, for example, if you look at the statistics of like what percentage of doctors are men, what percentage are women, what percentage are non-binary, and then you looked at what like ChatGPT said, how many should be, like how often it would say men, how often it would say women, it would say men maybe like 90% of the time, when in reality, 90% of doctors are not men, right? So it's amplifying these biases. And so that's where I think it is so important that we have these voices in the room, and particularly LGBTQ plus people, right? Queer and trans people who've historically been excluded from the development of a lot of these technologies, or whose voices are not like amplified in these rooms. What ends up happening is then these systems produce this kind of bias, right? It doesn't use people's appropriate name or pronoun. It might unintentionally out someone against their will. It might do things like not respect our family structures or our relationships. All of these things, because the models are not being built with these things in mind. And so it goes back to my point earlier about like either hyper stereotyping or erasure. When you don't have people in the room who can talk about like our lives are actually more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
And we live very, very rich lives that capture not just our queer identity, but our intersecting identities, where we grew up, our socioeconomic background, our class, our ethnicity, and so on and so forth. It ends up being this kind of extremes. What gave me inspiration is like when I was finishing my PhD, I felt very much like there was this separation between like being a queer person outside of work and with my husband and my family and friends, and at work it was like I'm an AI researcher and these things had nothing to do with each other. And then like when I was about to graduate, I discovered this organization, this group called Queer in AI. And that was like the first time I was like, whoa, these things can come together. I can find other queer people working on AI and find that community for myself.
Yeah. And has it felt like a space where you've been able to kind of feel comfortable being out in the space of AI? You can talk about like your workplaces or just like in general, like you mentioned, there's groups and stuff that are kind of dedicated to that. But does it feel like it's been a space where you feel like you can like be out, but also be kind of valued because of the unique perspectives that you can bring in because of your own lived experience that, you know, other folks can't bring in the same ways because they don't have the same lived experience?
I would say yes and no. It's hard to answer.
Yeah.
I've always been out, like once I started grad school and now as a professor, I feel like it's really important for me to be that role model or be open so that students can see that representation. So even when I was in grad school in my lab with my advisor and so on, I was always out and open. My advisor was very accepting, and she came to when I got married. She came to my wedding, so that it's like I felt like I was accepted, but it also felt like again there was that disconnect between what I was doing research on and what my identity. As I kind of came into my own and became my own like, professor, and I could decide what I wanted to do research on, that's when I finally felt like I can actually bring my lived experience into the work that I'm doing, both with like students I'm working with, but also in the research I'm doing. And so now I do a lot more intentional research that is about how do we design these systems with and for marginalized communities.
Could you tell us about, do you have any projects that you felt the most proud working on or things that have been meaningful / like what are you most proud of in your career?
I would say what I'm most proud of in my career is like graduating with a PhD and finishing my dissertation. It was such a massive undertaking, and I graduated during the pandemic, and that was really hard. Like I had to completely shift gears. I had originally planned to do a bunch of experiments with my robots in person, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I had to shift completely to doing everything like online and simulation, but I still graduated, and that was a really big accomplishment that I was proud of. I would say a project that I'm really excited about and proud of is one that I'm working on right now. We're doing a project where I have 5 queer students working with me in my lab, and we're doing a study to understand, is there any need for a robot companion for queer people? So it's really bringing together all of these things where I've been like so passionate about representation. I'm actually doing it now, and I'm really excited to like bridge these things together. And so the project is focused on, would queer people even want a robot? And what would that look like, both from a physical design point of view, what kind of ways, how should it behave, how should it talk to you, and then what do you want it to do? Like, do you want it to help clean your room, or do you want to be able to talk to it and get emotional support? Do you want it to help you pick out outfits that are affirming to your gender identity, or do you want it to help you figure out how to fill out your taxes? Right? We're really approaching this from like a community perspective of like, we're going to bring you in and ask you like, what do you want, if you want anything, and how do we build these systems with you and for you, rather than kind of what has been done so far, which is like these massive tech companies creating these things and kind of forcing it on all of us, right? We want to do a more bottom-up participatory approach. One, I'm excited that I like have this team of queer students and that they can bring their perspective and experience and we did a survey recently that we just wrapped up. We're analyzing the results of that, and now we're doing some focus groups. We're going to bring in people from the community and talk to them about this. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a prototype of a robot that maybe we can put out there into the world.
Yeah. I wanted to clean my room.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, clean your room. That's good to know.
Do you have any professional or personal goals that you want to achieve, in the next few years?
I would say a big professional goal is to get tenure. Yeah. I think that's like most professors, assistant professors want to get to that point. It's like a big milestone. It would give me job security. It would make me feel really accomplished for where I got to, and that security for my family is really important to me. And I think I also feel like a personal responsibility to my students to really continue to push my research and promote the value of doing research for LGBTQ plus people, for marginalized communities, for promoting diversity and inclusion and equity. I think these things are all under attack right now, and I want to really continue to push for and show how doing that kind of work really does uplift people and is valuable science, right? It doesn't make it any less scientific. I'm still following all the rigor of the science and research that I've learned, but it should be meaningful and purposeful, and it should be for our communities.
And what advice would you want to give to your younger self?
I think I would give my younger self the advice to just be more confident and curious and willing to take risks. I think I was really shy when I was young. I struggled to figure out what it is that I was passionate about, that I was interested in. And I think just being curious and open-minded is so important. And being willing to take risks, to try new things, to explore, to be willing to put yourself out there. It can be really scary, but it's also important. And you will get so much more joy out of life if you do that.
And normally my question is, what advice would you give to the next generation of LGBTQ folks coming into STEAM? But I actually want to change that a little for you. Yeah. So what advice would you want to give to your students in general?
I would tell them to be bold. Yeah, I would say, even though right now it's a time of huge change in our field and our society, I think now more than ever, we need your perspectives. We need your input. We need you to be part of this change and guide the change. That means being vocal, being outspoken, and making space for yourself. A lot of my students are coming out of the pandemic and having experienced significant social isolation and disruption in their schooling and so on. And I think I want them to realize they have a voice and they can use it.
Yeah. Is there any other thoughts you want to leave us with today?
We want you in academia. There's this perception that colleges, universities is this ivory tower, and that we look down on everyone else, and that we have very narrow mindsets. And in fact, it's the complete opposite. We want people from all different backgrounds and perspectives to come, to join us, to be part of this, because what we value is how all of our different ideas can come together to really create something interesting and novel and amazing. And it's not easy. And it's really hard also that in our society right now, people are really ingrained in their points of view and their perspective and their beliefs. And it's hard to sometimes look past your closely held beliefs and still recognize the value in the other person. And I think this is something I try to do personally, but also to teach. It's just even if we fundamentally disagree on something, it's irreconcilable, we can still find common ground, and we can still see the humanity in each other. And we need more of that. And I think going to college, being in a university setting is an amazing place to do that. And I don't try to change my students' minds. All I try to do is get them to think and form their own opinion.
And my last question, and this is optional, but if you have any shameless plugs for your work that you want to do, or anything you want to publicize or share with our audience in terms of like where they can find you or where they can find your work.
Yeah, I mean, you can just Google me, basically. I'm on LinkedIn, on Instagram. You can find me on my social media. And what I would say is, I'm always looking for people who are interested and motivated to come work with me, to collaborate with me. I always tell everyone I work with, right, whatever your background or your level is, like, we're working together and we're each contributing to it. So even if I work with high school students on research, and I value their input just as equally as working with another professor, because everyone is coming with different perspectives. So please, if you're interested in the research that I'm doing, reach out. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to find a way to work together on a project, because I think we can build AI systems and robots for our community, but I can only do that with people in our community and with the support from people in our community.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting and insightful getting to talk to you today, and we really appreciate your participation. So
thank you for having me. This has been really great.
Hey, you! Yes, you! Thank you for listening to this episode of Paths from LGBT Tech. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to never miss another episode. Show your support and allow us to keep sharing these stories. Didn't get enough? Check out past interviews to hear from more amazing queer professionals in science, technology, engineering, art, and math. See you next time.